Hello, and you are listening to Bill Murphy's Red Zone podcast. I interview leaders who inspire me in the areas of exponential technologies, business innovation, entrepreneurship, thought leadership, enterprise IT security, neuroscience, philosophy, personal development, and more. Welcome to the show. Welcome back to the show, everyone. This is Bill Murphy, your host of the Red Zone podcast. Today, my guest is David McKeown. He's a sought-after keynote speaker, leadership coach, and business growth advisor. And as a leader in today's unprecedented time of disruption, you're going to be put in positions to make critical decisions based on the unknown, based on the uncertainty of the unknown. And my guest is here to teach us how you as a leader can achieve your compelling vision. And how do you strengthen communication and accountability plans, even while facing an evolving condition and environment where you have little control? We never had control. However, we're constantly striving to put a structure around to at least give us a feeling that we're in control. However, in times like now, where there is a lot of uncertainty and a lot of both political uncertainty, economic uncertainty, health uncertainty, this is going to bring leadership to a new level. Those that can lead in the midst of these times are going to develop skills that I believe are going to be sought after for decades to come. David is the founder of the CEO of Outfield Leadership and has a new book called The Self-Evolved Leader: Elevate Your Focus and Develop Your People in a World That Refuses to Slow Down. And I'll have links to that in the show notes. So disruption is a new way of bringing into complete focus what we need to get done in the fewest amount of resources. It really focuses us, and organizations and leaders must ask the right questions and take a step back and look at what things they can do to maintain alignment with revenue, profits, while adding value to customers in the process. And some of the things you're going to learn from my conversation is what leadership models are emerging during this time period. What is the difference between bravery and heroic leadership? I think that's an important one to build into your verbal repertoire. And then how can a leader encourage collaboration across teams in the midst of uncertainty? You know, in the midst of uncertainty, the default behavior is command and control. And how can a leader encourage collaboration in a time of uncertainty? And how can leaders achieve more with less resources? That's one of my favorite topics recently. And how does working with fewer resources bring clarity within an organization? And then how did you leverage collective capabilities of your teams? And you know, what's going to emerge from this uncertainty, this time frame regarding humanity and leadership? What does it mean to have humanity and leadership? And what does it mean to have a leader that can shift between strategy, short and long-term goals, and how do you tighten your short-term focus without losing the long-term focus? So this is a fun interview and you're going to enjoy it. And I want to welcome you to my conversation with David McKeown.
Well, thank you, Bill, for having me. It's great to be with you.
So we have a unique challenge in our hands right now, and we could start talking a little bit about leadership in today's world. You have written a book called The Self-Evolved Leader, and I'd love for you to talk about, I'd love to ask you, what was the genesis of, everybody has a genesis and a spark where you felt like you had to write this book and to get it out into the world and out of your head. What was the spark for that was the precursor?
Well, I've been working for the last 12 years or so with leaders and leadership teams, essentially to help them build a compelling vision of where they're going, build a set of clear annual goals to achieve that vision, and then build a number of implementation and communication and accountability plans to achieve those goals. And so throughout the last 12 years in working with leaders and leadership teams, I've had the joy of seeing what truly great and effective leadership looks like, and to contrast that with not so good and great leadership. And it got to the point for me personally where I just wanted to broaden the impact that I was having. You go and you deliver a workshop for 20, 25 leaders at a time, and it's great because you get the opportunity to go deep with that group, but it's not exactly the most scalable model in terms of the impact that you're having. And so at about New Year's Eve, I think it was 2019, I came out with one goal, which was for that year, I wanted to write and then release a book that was essentially the sum total of the teaching that I had been working on and with over the last 12 years or so. So I guess it was a New Year's resolution really in 2019 that sparked it all for me.
Sure. And you wanted to broaden your impact, and certainly a book can do that. And I'm curious, as leadership is evolving right now, and we had in some of the things we were talking about prior to jumping on this call. Do you think leadership is easier when there's not as much fear involved in leadership?
I think great leadership is difficult at all times, but certainly what we're going through at the minute is shaking things up for people. And I think it's because so much of the choices in front of us are being taken out of our hands, when we're mandated to work from home, and the choices about closing down the economy are ultimately things that we have no control over. That makes it difficult for us as the leader because our choices are narrower, but it also makes it difficult for the folks that we're leading because there's just a greater sense of uncertainty and not this overarching sense of I can really do anything about it. And so I think when all of this happened, we saw a couple of models of leadership appear. First of all, were a certain subset of leaders who were just leading through fear and essentially retreating from what was in front of us, putting our kind of our head in the sand and just hoping that we can wait it out. Then there's a group of leaders who have been leading with certainty, and they say, you know what, we've been through challenges and crises before, and we know what's coming. And actually, from my perspective, leading through certainty at a time like this is a little detrimental because nobody knows what's going to happen next. And where I'm seeing those leaders who are really making a difference are the ones that are leading with true vulnerability to say, I don't know everything and things will likely continue to change. Here's what we do know. Here's our plan for getting back to whatever we need to get back to. But we need to go on this on a collective journey. And I want you to come with us. That's where I'm seeing leaders have the greatest impact at the minute.
Yeah, that takes quite a bit of courage to be able to take that approach, is more leading with courage and bravery, it seems to me.
Yeah, and I think that we've got to be sure that we're not conflating bravery with heroics. It's brave to come forward and say, I don't know where we're going, but here's my best guess, and will you come with me on this journey? Versus standing at the front and saying, I know 100%, we're going to get through this, and kind of trying to paint a message that's too optimistic because people can see through that and they know that the uncertainty isn't over yet, nor will it likely be for the next couple of months.
Yeah, it will take a while to go through what we're going through. And how does someone assess, or how does someone look at where people need to see leaders, they need to see an individual leader saying this is the way we're going, and then how does the leader actually get collaboration from a group of people in the midst of a lot of uncertainty? Have we ever had to lead like this before?
Yeah, I don't think on a scale like this we've seen, certainly from a generational perspective, anything like this. I mean, just the breadth and the depth of the impact that the virus and the economic shutdown is having on people. I just don't think that we've ever seen that before. And what I'm working through with my clients, and actually, funny enough, sounds like you're taking this perspective as well, is to say we can't predict what things are going to look like in a year from now. What we can do is try to wrestle back control and say, let's take a look at the next 90 days. Let's take a look at the next 3 months and begin to build some shorter term goals around how we might begin to rebuild once this all passes over us. Because there are a lot of leaders at the minute who are still in the day-to-day firefighting, in the weeds of the urgency that this has all caused, and actually actually at some point you need to begin to elevate your focus to the medium and long-term direction, even though you understand and know that things may change and shift. Everybody's annual plan for 2020 is out the window. So how do we start to rebuild something in shorter chunks? And so I'm working with my clients on helping them build 90-day plans, knowing that they need to remain agile within that period of time.
It's really quite interesting. You and I, we shared ahead of time this 100-day challenge for my technology decision makers, and you brought up the control, and I think one of the big issues right now is that people we're now 100% out of a control state and into really uncertainty, and I wonder if there's a value in taking an inventory of what things one can control in a short-term window.
Very much so. And I think that's where the leaders that are going to be effective through this are currently doing and will continue to do. They'll say, look, we had 10 options ahead of us for this year. We were working on 10 major strategic initiatives, let's say. Now, 8 of them are just not feasible. One of them, we could potentially pivot to a slightly different version of it. And so ultimately, we're left with, one strategic initiative that's currently still in its current form, for an example. So rather than worrying about the 8 things that have been shut off for us, let's start with those 2 avenues that we could go down and begin to take back control and say, okay, if we're going to work on those, what does that look like? What are the goals that we need to achieve or want to achieve in the next 90 days? How might we get there and start to rebuild it that way? Funny enough, what I'm also seeing kind of on the flip side of all of this as well is in the same sentiment with options and choices being removed, what it's doing for some organizations, if you're listening, is it's stripping out a lot of the old noise that was there and leaving some really clear signals behind. And what do I mean by that? Well, things like your core values as an organization, I think now is a really good time to reassess those and see what still holds true. Certain processes or systems that have accreted over time because that's just how processes grow. Are there anything that you need to simplify to streamline your operations? Even the product and service mix of a lot of organizations, the amount of times I've had a client tell me, we've got this old service that we only provide to 2 customers, but it's 30% of our revenue, so we don't want to kill it. They're now getting to the point where they're saying, well, actually, the amount of work that we have to put into service that, maybe it would make sense if we back that out. So I think there's an odd degree of clarity that's out there or available to you if you take the time to listen and pay attention.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty powerful. I did see, there's one part of your book which just talks about achieving more with fewer resources. And it's certainly, when you wrote the book, probably weren't thinking about this particular issue, but there's one thing that this type of this event brings, and that's complete focus and in getting things done with the fewest amount of resources, because I think companies are somewhat fat going into this.
I think so. We get fat and we get lazy, and that's not, I don't mean those in derogatory terms. It's just, you come off the back of the economic expansion that we've had, and for a lot of organizations, there's just been this ability to just continue, 1 + 1 = 2, and add another one, we get 3. And I think that there is just, we have this magnificent ability as people in our companies to just allow things to happen that previously, we would have fought against. And I think we're moving back to a point of what really is true for you. So even things like reassessing the type of person that you hire, what are you looking for from that? Reassessing how you make decisions as a leadership team, reassessing how you hold yourself accountable. Now is a really good time to trim some of that away and look at the emergence of your organization through all of this as a way to, if not completely reinvent who you are, certainly give yourself a shot in the arm and a chance to rebuild something that looks completely different.
Yeah, I think a lot of companies are going to be scrambling, maybe not the right word, but they're definitely going to be focused on revenue and alignment of people and systems to revenue and taking care of customers. I wonder, from a leadership perspective, if people are asking the right questions. Like, I wonder if they could take an audit and inventory of like what things they do in a particular day that are aligned with revenue and adding value in that process.
I think that's a really great example of what we can be doing presently. You think about on any given day, any person in an organization, they take anywhere between 70 and 120 non-trivial actions or decisions, depending on their level of seniority and where they are in the organization. Things like, should I give this customer this discount? Should I shout at this person? Should I come into this meeting? Should I stay an hour later to finish that report? Should I send that email? Should I fire this person? Should I hire this person? Just a huge number of actions on an individual level. And then if you multiply that out across your organization, it's just a massive amount of actions and decisions that are being made on any given day. And often, particularly when times are quote unquote good or certainly better, a lot of those actions don't add up to achieving the overarching mission or vision of the organization. And in fact, if you ask somebody, why are you doing what you're doing today? In a lot of cases, there won't be a clear or concise understanding from them of how what they're doing adds up to achieving that mission and vision. And when you get that right, that's when you get true alignment in your people and in your teams, because they can see a clear correlation between what they do every day and where your business is going. Often why that gets very squiffy or gray is because in our organizations, we're very good at shifting priorities. And so folks don't have time to stay aligned around any one thing for any particularly significant length of time before another set of priorities come in. And so where we're at now, like you said, if there's one overarching objective at the minute, it's got to be revenue and then rebuilding what looks like after all of this passes. If you can get a drumbeat of communication that just keeps people really focused on that, and to your point, ask yourself as a leader and your team, the actions that you're taking today, how does that add up to our overarching goal of achieving additional revenue or whatever it might be? Then you're going to see greater alignment in our organizations.
Yeah, and I don't think you, again, could have picked some of the wording on the book as clearly and cogently as you did, but the overemphasis on a visionary leader I found interesting. And it's funny, the brain, I had a gentleman on last week and we were talking, he researched 36 of the top neuroscientists in the world. And, our brain really works differently under fear than under vision. And I in this time here, I wonder how a leader can be most effective knowing that they've got to be super tactical on the short term, but they can act with a longer term vision of realignment. And I often wonder what's the best way to approach that.
I think in times like this, the more collaborative you can expand that sharing of the vision, the better, because there's such a big unknown. And so any one leader that's trying to see where we're going, I think is viewing things with blinkers on. And so rather than just having the blinkers of one person, if you can broaden out the more strategic long-term discussions amongst your team to get a range of views, I think there will be more likely positive solutions that sit in the periphery of those discussions than there will be of any one person sitting at home trying to figure out what comes next. And so, my perspective with leadership teams has always been to share the load of the strategic direction of the organization. I think now more than ever, we need that. Having said that, and part of the reason I go in that direction is not everybody's wired to think like Steve Jobs or Elon Musk or those visionary leaders that we put up there as the bastion of great leadership. And to try to do so is folly. So actually, that's why I work with leadership teams to help them spread that vision so that it's not just reliant on this belief that we've all got to be a visionary leader.
So what would you consider, what's your primary superpower when you start working with organizations, Dave? What is it that you're able to multiply within an organization and from an impact perspective that you found through the past 15 years? What has that been?
For me, it's the ability to bring a group of senior leaders together and hold the space for them to have difficult discussions about the direction of the organization and how they work together collectively. It's funny, we have this belief that when people get to a senior level in leadership in an organization, that somehow the adults are in charge. And the reality is that leadership teams are often quite dysfunctional places, mostly in things that are not being said rather than things that are being said. And so getting a leadership group to be able to come into a room and have adult-to-adult conversations to make the decisions that they need to as a group in the room, and to then go out with stacked hands to communicate the decisions that they've been made and to implement it, can often be a difficult thing for leadership teams to do. So that's why I spend a lot of my time working through.
What do you see gets most leadership teams kind of gunked up as far as that you need to kind of unhinge and sort of put some oil in the grooves as far as getting that team to work together? Is it just like if you had a company that had 10 major objectives this year, but now with the shakeup, now it's got to be 3, what can be some of the friction points that can pop up relative to that?
It's usually ego. I mean, everything that comes down to a dysfunctional relationship between any group of people is usually founded in the ego. And so often what happens is the discussions that happen in the room are maybe 60 to 70% of the reality of what people are thinking and feeling. But for fear or reasons of politicking, those opinions don't get expressed in the room. And so often what happens, people go along with a decision that they're not comfortable with. And then once that meeting's over, there's a meeting outside of the meeting between 2 or 3 other people. And they say, well, I actually think we shouldn't have done that. And then everybody has to come back together again and have another discussion. And we're just kind of going round the houses again at that point. Or there's just this sense of kind of pre-meeting politicking where folks try to manipulate the decision that's made and try to build together some cliques within a team to push their agenda, rather than starting from the premise of we're all adults here, we're all have a vested interest in making this business be the best that it can. So let's find a way to have that adult discussion that doesn't involve the ego. Let's actually have the discussion that you truly want to have, even if you're not necessarily going along with what the rest of the group thinks, knowing that you shouldn't have to be fearful of that because there's trust and there's safety in the group. Then once you make the decision, going out and essentially getting to the point where no matter who in the organization talks to what leader, the message is the same. One of the things that really just slows down the implementation of anything is if one leader goes back to their team and just rolls their eyes and says something along the lines of, well, you'll never guess what they decided in there. Now, I fought for our team. We didn't win it this time, but we'll get them next time. You just start to bring division and functional walls up whenever you start doing that. So just having the ability to really have a grown-up, mature discussion in the room and then support proactively the decisions that are made whenever you're moving to implementation.
What percentage of the equation do you think, through your experience, is the CEO or the most powerful person in the room have to be the conscious leader? Like, would you say that everybody, because I know part of it is raising the consciousness of leadership within that you mentioned in your book of everyone, but how much of it is from a percentage really aligned to the most powerful person in the room has to be conscious for it to work across the whole group?
Most organizations at some point will have that dynamic going on, and it really comes down to the perspective of the CEO. I mean, at the end of the day, they are the one that has that authority and power to grant out to the rest of their team. And the problem with that model is it's dependent on an individual person. You know, if something happens to the CEO, or if they step away from the business, or they're incapacitated for a period of time, which, given where we're at, is more likely than before, the leadership team doesn't have the muscle to be able to continue to guide and grow and build the organization. And a lot of that actually comes down to what can often be the big missing part is if you have a particularly visionary CEO and the rest of the team doesn't have the opportunity to build that muscle, when the CEO isn't there, there's no long-term vision for the organization. And you see it quite often in organizations when the founder leader left. You know, it happened at Apple when Steve Jobs got kicked out. It happened at Dell a bunch of times. It happened at Starbucks whenever Howard Schultz went away. It's happening right now with Disney, where Bob Iger stepped away about a month ago, and now he's back in as the CEO because there's too much vested belief that that single individual person is our hero that can lead us through this time, rather than a team of people who are capable and qualified to do that. So I work on trying to help leadership teams make their decision-making process more scalable, so it's not dependent on any one individual.
Yeah, and that's why I love your approach to the collective capabilities, because that's definitely a hard one. But when you have so much uncertainty, I can see where that can get pretty powerful, because you can scale your if you had true alignment, you could scale your intelligence pretty quickly of being able to navigate an uncertain marketplace, uncertain conditions, if you definitely had that alignment across the core main team versus having 100% of that be on your own back.
Very much so. And if you think about it like a pie chart, you've got what we know, and then we've got the unknown unknowns. And the current pandemic clearly sat within that unknown, and nobody could see it nor predict it. And for the most part, unless you were deep in epidemiology study for the last 10 years. But certainly from a business perspective, it came out of nowhere. And back to that point on any one particular leader helping us through this, that segment of what they know is only going to be so wide, not maybe wider than other people's, but it's not going to be the whole pie or even half of it. Whereas if you bring in everybody else's collective consciousness, it just increases that level of what we know by a little bit more and a little bit more. And actually what that helps do is it helps eat into that big black hole of we just don't know what's out there, because we're starting to just get a little bit smarter collectively. And that can be the difference between emerging from this in a successful way on the front foot with some momentum behind you, or emerging from this with a business that's no longer valid.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you, Dave. I think this your concept of growing the collective consciousness of the organization is a big one, and certainly, gosh, the power that would get from the leadership team and from the top, it would just be able to navigate times of uncertainty so much more powerfully. Is there anything in particular, Dave, that it's popped up in your head as I'm talking to you that you're hoping I ask you that I haven't asked yet?
You know what? My overarching sense in all of this is we don't know what's coming next. And the more, the themes of our conversation, I think that if somebody can take that and run with it, they've got a greater likelihood of emerging from this in a positive way. My sense is that the concepts of leadership at the minute and where society was moving before we entered all of this will continue to grow and move. And actually, one of the things that we may well see emerging out of this is, once the immediate crisis is over, just more of a human sense in how we lead our teams, rather than just always thinking about the bottom line, actually thinking about how to have a greater impact on the people that work for us, on our organizations, on the communities that we serve, and really just trying to build a greater sense of humanity in how we interact with each other. I hope that's another outpouring as a result of what we're going through.
I think that what's in breaking this down into 90 and 100-day chunks, I'm not sure why that we don't do that all the time. I mean, that really, and I know that Wall Street tends to do it that way, but from a focus point of view, there's nothing like a crisis to give us focus. And I don't think we should manufacture a crisis all the time, but there's a certain lightness that comes from, okay, this is all that I need to accomplish the goal at hand, and focusing on the few, not the many. There's an interesting perspective that's going to come out of this. Even the way we look at when we hire someone, back to that point you made earlier, are we really looking at who we're hiring and who's in different positions, and are we just kind of cleaning up, and really have we fully communicated to everybody in the organization what it is that would give them a successful week, a successful month, a successful quarter? And are we really paying attention to the people in the organization and giving them a sense of, okay, this is what it means to be successful, versus I think sometimes you can get sloppy when you don't have the urgency.
Very much so. And it's funny, I've been working with my clients for the last 12 years trying to help them build quarterly implementation cycles, because most leaders are good at setting a series of goals for the year, and then they just get swept away from the day-to-day, and priorities shift and change. And the greatest thing that you can do is, whether you're leading an organization or you just in your own personal goal setting, the greatest thing that you can do is spend some time lifting your head above water to see what's going on. And I think that a lot of organizations will sense that focus has been really good for them, and I hope that it will continue. But I don't know. There's that natural human nature to just want to go back to the way things were before. So we'll see how that shakes out. On your point on hiring, I think that we'll start to see people moving back to hiring for cultural fit more so than competency, because it's much easier to teach somebody a skill than it is to teach them what it means to work here and how we add value to what we're doing. And I think that when you hire for cultural fit, so long as you've got the right values, much easier to align people around that, and to go through that process of saying, okay, here's what we need to achieve this quarter. Here's where we need to be at the end of the month to be on track for that. Here's what you need to achieve this week. What are you working on today, and how can I best help you get there? It goes back to that model we were talking about earlier about linking the everyday actions to the overarching mission and vision of the organization. When you have people that are just such a good cultural fit for the organization, it's much easier to do that.
Well, I encourage all my listeners to go out and click the link for the Amazon link that I'm going to put for Dave's book called The Self-Evolved Leader, which the irony of the subtitle is amazing. Elevate your focus and develop your people in a world that refuses to slow down, which I love, because now that we're slow, now it's time to focus.
Right.
Don't have the excuse anymore, right?
Yeah, you don't have that excuse to say, well, I don't have any time. Well, you got a bit more time than you did beforehand. Yeah, absolutely.
This is great, Dave. I appreciate you for coming on the show today, and I really encourage everybody I'm going to have links to your LinkedIn to connect with you, and Twitter, and to your Amazon for folks to look to buying your book. So I appreciate you for coming on the show, Dave.
Thank you so much for having me, Bill. Really appreciate it. Enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you. Have a good day. So there you have it. This wraps another episode of Bill Murphy's Red Zone podcast. To get all the relevant show notes, please go to our blog at www.redzonetech.net/podcasts. Additionally, make sure you go to iTunes and leave your comments in iTunes about the show. This helps our show rankings enormously, and it helps support the show. Until next time, I appreciate you very much for listening. Thank you.